Hi everyone, I hope you're well. So today I'm going to talk about the worst books or the most disappointing books that I read this year. Or rather the books that I rated the lowest, 2 stars out of 5 and lower. And some of these I made dedicated reviews on videos on, but I wanted to make this video because some of these I didn't make a video on, or I might have mentioned them in a video, but I didn't, make an entire video about them. And also because I want to focus more on the maybe spoilery aspects of them, or just focus more on the negative aspects of the book, as opposed to talking about both the good and the bad, which I did in dedicated reviews and other videos like that. And I'm basically going to be ranking them. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the one that I kind of don't have that much of an issue with, but I still consider it among the most disappointing or the worst. And the last one that I'm going to talk about is going to be the absolute worst that I read and that I rated the lowest. So the first one that I'm going to talk about, or number 5, is going to be The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars, and I did make a dedicated review on this book. I will link them in the iCard, I think, or somewhere in the description. The reason why this was especially disappointing to me, this is more disappointing than bad, I guess, but it was such an extremely hyped book last year, and also the first third or so of the book kind of made me feel like it was going to be much better than it really ended up being. I think it had, at the beginning I thought that it had a pretty interesting writing style. I wasn't feeling the characters as much, or even the story necessarily, but I was, interested. I thought that maybe there would be some twists and turns and stuff like that. And well, that wasn't really the case. I ended up having several issues with the book. First of all, the action or gore scenes, or violent scenes, horror scenes, or whatever, almost all of them in the story are pretty hazy and kind of written in a way that is almost like they're deliberately confusing, and it really loses the momentum of the action, because you often have to read it twice, so it doesn't really feel very fast paced even when it is. It's kind of like those movies that have really like shaky camera in the action scenes, or they have very dark lighting in the action scenes, and you can barely tell what's going on. There's an action scene, and maybe there's like some violence going on, but you don't really know. It also has a really standard kind of slasher movie formula, which again is the kind of thing that I thought it wasn't going to do at the beginning, because it really seemed almost like literary fiction or some sort of experimental thing based on the first third or so of the book, and then it evolved into something much more expected and standard. It didn't really subvert anything. Nothing was really that unexpected, which I wouldn't mind that much. I mean, stories don't really have to be subversive to be good. All that I really want is a good story with compelling characters, but the problem is that I don't think this novel really gave that either. So some of the main characters I don't think really any of the main characters, by which I mean the 3 men that are kind of in this issue, right, this curse or whatever you might want to call it, because the 4th guy is the guy who dies in the beginning of the story, so he's not really one of the main characters. And these guys are not that interesting. They're not really given that much depth, and also they're very, very unlikable. I don't think I said that in my review, which was a while ago, I think, well, several months ago, but maybe among them the most likable one is Louis, because we do know a little bit more about him. But even then, when I look back at it, I'm like, I think even Louis isn't really, I can't really root for him that much. Consider the fact that he killed a woman who was really, I would say, otherwise innocent, in a really horrible, gory way, deliberately, just because he had a slight bit of a hunch that she was associated with something that was harming him. And also he did some other things and just acted and spoke in general ways that are like, okay, you're a little bit of an asshole. And he never really got any comeuppance for anything that he did. It was like he was just a very passive character, because all that happened to him was because of something external, because of this other entity. And he didn't really get any comeuppance. He does die early on, but he was going to die anyway. I mean, it was pretty evident that he was going to get killed anyway by this entity, I guess. So he didn't really get comeuppance for the person that he was in general, right? He was just getting vengeance for like this small thing that happened once, as opposed to who he was overall, which really wasn't that great either. Really, all of them, or at least the three of them, are really a bit selfish and honestly don't seem that interesting otherwise. They weren't really given any depth aside from the fact that one of them has a girlfriend, one of them has a daughter, but that's it. It really feels more like the backstory comes into the novel as soon as the author wants you to feel bad for them because they are about to encounter this curse or encounter this monster, and you're gonna have to care about them in that moment. And interestingly, I felt like the minor characters were more interesting or just were more compelling, and you were more interested in what happened to them, at least in my case, because they were more innocent and also seemed like better people for the most part. And interestingly, felt like those minor characters or those secondary characters were the ones who were more punished and they had to pay for what the main guys did. Speaking of which, the women in the story, the sidekicks, I guess, the girlfriend, the wife, the whatever the case may be, those seem to get the goriest deaths in the story. And also the dogs or animals, they seem to also be given the most gory and like really horrible deaths. Whereas the main characters, the male characters, including the main characters, seem to die just by being shot and or just like disappearing and dying outside of the narration, not even in the actual story, not even in a way that is described in the narration. And it frustrates me that a lot of people didn't mention that at all. Maybe they ignored it, maybe they didn't notice it, but I thought it was really strange for almost no reviews, even the negative ones or the 3-star ones in Goodreads or here on YouTube. Almost none of them seem to mention this pattern going on in the book. And I don't think it really didn't seem to me at all like it was some sort of social commentary. The fact that the women died in a more horrible way, it seemed more like they were just puns in the story and not something that was commented on, like he wasn't really, I don't think at all, nothing in the narration at least makes me think that he was trying to make a point about violence against women or anything like that. My issues with the pacing as well, it seems like the more action or intense parts of the story were immediately followed by really just mundane stuff, some of which wasn't necessarily that interesting either, because I think slice of life or mundane stuff can be interesting if the characters themselves are interesting or what have you, but I felt like there wasn't that much effort put into the backstories and the personalities and all these things, and that wouldn't be that much of an issue if the story was scary, if it was a scary horror story, but it doesn't really do any of the things that I think this story should do, or that it could do to redeem itself, either being a little bit unexpected or being extremely or especially scary or scarier than I expected, or just being a very well written, compelling story. So it pretty much fails in all accounts. However, I do have a few pros or good positive points to give to this book. So if you want to see them, I do recommend that you watch the full review. But overall, I was really disappointed in this book. So number 4 is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I also made a full review on this book. I'm not super proud of it, mostly because of the audio. It kind of goes weird in some places. But first of all, most of the book doesn't really have anything that interesting going on. Mostly it's stuff that in the, let's say, I'm supposed to not care about spoilers, but I don't really want to spoil it for you anyway. There's something kind of brewing under the whole thing, right? But most of the story is very mundane stuff and honestly kind of petty drama that may have some depth if you really scratch at it, but really just like petty drama and stuff that isn't really that interesting. Characters that are kind of flat, honestly, difficult to see as real people. Pretty much just the last third gets interesting in any way, and even the last third I don't really like, even though there are a lot of things going on in it. We know the characters since they're children until they're adults, and throughout those several years they seem like the same people. They haven't changed at all. Like I said, they feel really flat and just not fleshed out at all. Like they have no real dreams, they have no real goals and interests. They're all really passive. Pretty much all of the characters in the story are really passive, which I guess is part of the message of the story, but honestly I think it's still a flaw, because I think I said that in the preview, in the review, full review, but I think the author relied too much on the premise of the book to do most of the work, when in reality the premise is like barely half of the work. I mean, I think pretty much all of the work and all of the good that a book has to give is in the execution. It also does that dystopian thing that I hate. Every time I read that thing happening in a story, I hate it more, where a character who is older usually, or more powerful, or has been there for longer and knows more about the world, will basically sit down with the main character and will start to explain to them in a monologue how the world works. They will explain to them, hey, the world used to be this way, but now it's this way. And I've always disliked it. I think I've disliked this for a long time, because it seems to really simplify the way the world is. In the first place, we don't really know whether what's happening in the story is even happening throughout the world, or it's something that some countries have rejected and that only English people are doing, or how we don't know anything really about the outside world. And I understand that in a way, because the narrative is a first person narrative, so, and that character doesn't really know that much about the outside world. But it's odd, because she did have a lot of time to learn about the outside world, because she was years living in it. And for some reason, in her several years in the outside world, being exposed to television and newspapers and stuff like that, and a lot of old stuff, old archives or whatever, she never encountered any discussion on the thing that was kind of revealed, or whatever, what you might want to call it, by the end, which I'm gonna talk about spoilers here, but basically she was never, for some reason, all these kids or people, when they're adults at some point, of course, these kids never saw, as they lived in the outside world, they never saw a single archive or old essay, old newspaper article, anything like that, discussing or debating this idea on whether or not they had souls. Like, that's something that they had no way of knowing anything about, until this character told them, hey, there's people who don't even know you have souls, or don't even believe you have souls, or whatever. And it's like, how the fuck is that the first time that they are introduced to this concept, when they have lived in this world for a long time? Like, do they never look at anything historical at all? Or like, are there no museums? Is there no discussion of this at all in the world, in any other country? I mean, what's going on, It just seemed like the premise was really forced, and it just seemed like the author was forcing a plot twist where it wasn't really necessary. It didn't really, this story or this subject, the story wasn't really affected in the meaning or the message by the fact that there was a twist, like, oh, this and that. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make any difference in the depth of the story, and the twist really makes it a bit more unbelievable, and therefore the dystopianness of it kind of loses the impact, because the point of a dystopian is like, it's a little scary because it feels like it could really happen. And of course, anything that feels like it's kind of forced or kind of a stretch is going to make it less scary and less impactful. And I understand that it's a dystopian, but again, it's one of those dystopian tropes that I really dislike. The fact that the world is like simplified to be explained as if one single person in the world could explain the current world to one person, like as if that could be something that could happen. Can you imagine that? I mean, absolutely not. So number 3 is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I know, but hear me out. I gave it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. My main issue here, and really the source of almost all of my problems with the story, is the writing style. It just uses so many words, but it says so little. And it doesn't really allow you to make up your mind about what's going on in the story. Like, you cannot make up your mind about anything, because the narrator is constantly telling you instead of showing you things. Like, oh, this is fancy, but it's not too gaudy, it's this and that. Like, listen, if you want to describe things, like, at least tell me what it looks like, instead of trying to tell me what you think about it. And I understand that it's supposed to be an unreliable narrator because this is a satire or whatever, but honestly, it just kind of makes it so that I can't enjoy it as a satire because I don't think it really has that much depth. And I also can't enjoy it as a romance because it has all of these other things going on that have nothing to do with the romance, or that are just maybe related to the romance but that don't really add much to it. I honestly think most of the characters, if not pretty much all of them, are very, very one-dimensional, except of course for the two main characters who we are supposed to like, of course. And the main character, you know, what's her name? Fucking Elizabeth Bennet, isn't it? Yeah. So she is kind of portrayed as this like, oh, she has so much depth, you know, in comparison to these other really shallow women. And I understand that this trope of like not like other women was not really a thing back then, or maybe it was. I mean, who knows? Sometimes you are surprised by how old some things are, but who knows? The point is that maybe it wasn't really meant to be like that. Maybe it was trying to tell you something beyond that. But it really felt to me like all those other characters were portrayed in a very on the nose, bad way in order to make the main character, seem more sympathetic in comparison and seem more intelligent and more interesting in comparison. Even though she wasn't really that interesting, in all honesty, she wasn't really that interesting. And honestly, this book has no right being this long because the few things that happen are like stretched so thin that it just gets really boring, because all I keep thinking is, well, okay, I get it, let's just get on to the next thing, because this is really just not that interesting. And the conflicts that happen, I mean, again, they're stretched so much that they just get old. And also most of the conflict is pretty annoying and you just don't care from the beginning. I mean, when, you know, this guy who proposed to Elizabeth Bennet in the near the beginning, when he goes to marry the friend of hers, it's like, I mean, we know we don't care about that guy from the first, you know, from the beginning we know we don't care about that guy, so why do we have to focus so much time on a character in a conflict that is so petty and a character that is so uninteresting? I mean, sincerely. So number 2 is Honor Bound by Sandra Brown. I didn't make a dedicated video on this, but I did like really negatively talked about this in one video. It was like a book tag or something like that. And maybe I have talked about it since, well, I did talk about it in my video about sort of the racism that happens sometimes in some novels that that focus on a romance between a Native American man and a white woman. In that video, I talked about a few different tropes that I noticed in this type of romances, right? In these types. And I felt like, in a way, a lot of them seem to be stereotyping Native men, and I don't think I said that in this video, but I actually would conclude that among all the books that I talked about, Honor Bound is probably the most racist one by far. So the thing is that the love interest in Native man is an ex-con, and he's essentially a rapist. And overall just like sexually violent towards the main character. We're supposed to think it's hot, right? Of course. But that doesn't really change much. And by the way, this novel, Honor Bound, is set in the 1980s, okay? It's not the 1880s. It's the 1980s. So don't come out with anything like, oh, but you know, they used to do... No. That's not what's going on here. And even if you put that aside, I mean, the whole story is just like so full of cliches. The characters are one-dimensional. The story is very expected, you know, everything. The writing style is really nothing special. So number 1 and the worst one by far is one that I did make a dedicated review on. It's called 99% Mine, and I gave it 0.5 out of 5 stars. And truly, I think I should have just given it 0 stars. I feel like that half star is like out of pity. In my full review, like I said it was the worst book I've ever read, and I still think that's the case. Even in terms of enjoyment, there were several points in Honor Bound that I almost enjoyed, or that I actually sincerely enjoyed, or that I thought were kind of sweet, or like unintentionally funny, like the way that it was written, or the dialogue was really ridiculous or something like that. In this story, that's not even the saving grace that it has. So the half star that I gave it is mostly because the writing style wasn't too terrible, but it was still bad, if I'm being honest, which is why I'm saying that I should probably give it 0 stars. Because first of all, it seems like you needed an editor, like it wasn't really edited well, and it's still kind of below average in terms of style by the way that a lot of things are worded in like really really ridiculous in ways that are not meant to be ridiculous, that you're meant to take them seriously. There were even some quotes that I said in my full review or something. I said that one of the things that the narrator constantly says is alpha or alpha male, like, you know, in reference to people that she unironically calls them alpha. Okay, that's kind of cringe. You shouldn't have done that. Like, that's a little stupid. And then there's a quote that I directly repeat in my review, which is the women look jealous, the men avert their eyes. And I thought it was funny because it reminded me, I think I said it in the video, it reminded me of the writing on My Immortal, the infamous fanfiction. The main character is honestly the worst character I've read so far that I can remember. She has the emotional maturity of a toddler, and she has pretty much no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And in terms of the storyline, the actual sequence of events, there's maybe like 3 things again that happen in the story, and it's basically the same thing happening over and over, like a series of miscommunication and like what do you call it, you know, fighting, or you know, I guess breaking up or whatever you might. They're not really together at the beginning, but there's like this cycle of like miscommunication, and they stop talking, or they are cold to each other, and then they make up, but they don't learn from that experience. So the next time that they fight, the same thing happens over and over, and they always fight about like the most petty stuff. Okay, just pure miscommunication, just like petty stuff that could be resolved easily by talking for 5 minutes. In fact, the events are stretched so thin that there's like entire chapters of nothing happening, and it's just a narrator telling you over and over how much she wants him but she can have him, and it's like, listen, this is not even interesting or enjoyable to read at all. And like I said, our conflict just relies on the characters being petty or just straight up stupid. Okay, and the narrator, like I said, it's just so unlikable. Everything that she says is honestly like, even the first 2 chapters, I remember that the first 2 chapters, nothing happens in them. The first two take place in the bar, I think. By the way, she works at the bar, but then the rest of the novel, the bar is not even mentioned. It doesn't matter at all. It literally makes no difference that she works at a bar or that she was at the bar in those first 2 chapters. Like, it doesn't matter at all. Really, just dumb story. Honestly, such a dumb story, and it's not even the enjoyable kind of dumb story, you know? It's not like, oh, so bad it's good. Like, it's actually, you suffer reading this. It's sincerely not even likable in any way. And even then, the romance itself, like, there was absolutely no chemistry between the characters at all. In fact, I could feel them as one of those relationships that are bad from the beginning. Like, they should not be together, okay? Because they clearly don't know how to properly communicate anything at all. And even the good isn't good, okay? Like, there's honestly nothing sweet or cute about the romance, the romantic parts, like absolutely nothing. I think there's something about romance novels that when they fail, they have basically nothing to really fall back on, which is why I think some of my books, which is why I think so many of these books that I found to be the worst this year are romances, or they're partly romance or something like that, because they don't have any other qualities to fall back on, you know, like world building, depth, writing style, because usually romances are, I mean, it's a very profitable genre, so I guess a lot of people might just be writing it because it makes money, and they don't really have to make that much of an effort because clearly anything gets published. I did read a few romance novels this year that I thought were really good, or at least pretty good, or, you know, a bit above average or whatever, but those tend to be less popular. It seems to me that these books that get popular, at least in the genre of romance, tend to be the worst examples of their genre. And in order to find good romance, you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper. So yeah, those are the books, the worst and most disappointing books that I read this year. So I hope you somehow found some sort of enjoyment from this video and me complaining about stuff. And yeah, I think this will be the last video that I filmed this year. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.